All right. Well, we're going to get started. I know there's only three of us right now, so hopefully we'll have some more people join us. But I'd like to welcome our expert today. Her name is Laura. And Laura, would you like to go ahead and give us a little introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. First, Amy, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over this process and connecting. A little bit about myself. My name is Laura Venezia, and I am originally from the States. So I come from Florida. I studied early childhood education at university and have been in the field for 19 years in various paths. I started in preschools back in Florida and then was in kindergarten for a while. And then I left and moved to China because that seemed like the right idea. So I relocated over to China where I taught English for a year and then wanted to kind of expand. So moved to Hong Kong. I was in a local curriculum in Hong Kong in kindergarten as well, and then moved into a PYP school. I worked there for 4 years where I was also a PYP coordinator and then head teacher. So I worked with multiple campuses as well. And that was my first introduction into the international school setting. From there, I went into an international kindergarten as a head of school, which was a Montessori and inquiry based school. I was there for 2 years and then COVID kind of drove me out of Asia. And I am now working in Germany. I am the kindergarten principal at Leipzig International School. So it's very fitting that we're talking about multilingual learners because our community has over 70 nationalities represented within our school. I would say 50 within the kindergarten itself. Equal between the students and the staff. So we're quite a diverse team.
That's a diverse, yes.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Okay, Amy, are we all good?
We are all good, yes.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll be talking about multilingual learners and documentation. And throughout today's session, we're going to be looking at learners in a school setting. We're going to look at this in the context of an international school. The use of learning stories, how to include learners and families in documentation, and then at the end or just throughout, we'll have time to talk together. So if there are any points or questions that come up that you're curious about, I'm happy to have this more as a dialogue rather than just a one-way communication. So I wanted to start by just talking about international school settings as well. And they are very unique places. And we're very fortunate to be in international schools where we are surrounded by a variety of cultures because those cultures bring us different perspectives. Every person has different skills and knowledge and languages that then fill our environment. Students and educators then expand their understanding of the world, cultures, and people. And that's something that I think cannot be overlooked when we're talking about school settings and just the importance of all of that information that we get and how fortunate we are to be able to be surrounded by that. Another point of that is, especially if you're in a unit or an inquiry-based setting, when you're looking at your units, you have the opportunity to really explore deeper into some concepts and ideas because you're able to bring a lot more information from different contexts around the world, different cultures and different perspectives. So all of those contributions of everyone can really help you go deeper into a unit and to really make strong connections. But of course, with everything, there's another side. And international settings can be challenging for some children. And this is maybe more relevant if you have a child that is coming to you that does not have a connection with the host country or the language of instruction. So if you have a child that's coming to you that does not speak either of the languages of the setting, then it could be a complex environment for them. They don't have that connection to the host country, to the language. They have minimal connections with their peers, perhaps. And they might even perceive themselves as being seen differently. And I wanted to share this because I do have firsthand experience with this. When I was back in the States, I was teaching in my kindergarten class, and I had a student, it was actually my practicum when I was studying. I had one student that was from China, and we started to do world studies. And I realized that during that time, or actually at the start of the year, she was, my perception, quite withdrawn. She was very quiet. She did not engage a lot with the other members of the class. And if I ever tried to talk to her about her language, maybe asking her to make some connections between language, she did not want to engage in any of that. So it was almost as if she was having a conflict between her identity and where she was in that setting. So kind of when I was thinking about what projects we were going to be doing, I was thinking about that and decided to do a bit of a world, like a cultural study. So I took some of the cultures that were represented within the classroom, and we looked at that. When we started looking into and exploring China as a country, you can see that she was slowly starting to get involved and warm up to the idea a little bit. Then we started to look at other aspects. And at the same time was when I had just accepted the job that I was going to be moving to China. And so I shared that with the class. And then that was when she really made her first steps forward. She was engaging in the language. She was sharing with others. She was teaching us how to say some words. She started bringing snacks to school to share with others that were familiar to her. So that was something that she was able to share and bring a bit of herself and her identity into that. So it took that process of helping her make those connections with others for her to become more engaged and more confident within the setting. So then when we look at that, there are a couple things that we need to know about multilingual learners. So first, we've all heard of the silent period. And this is just when children are engaging in a new language and they just are really taking that time to absorb. So they're not expressing as much, but they're definitely receiving all of that information and everything involved with that new language. But I think it's important for us as educators to allow that time and space for the learners to engage with the new language, because they're processing a lot. They're taking that all in. They're trying to make sense of it. They're comparing it to their known language. There's some extension there. So they're really trying to organize all of that within their own minds before being expressive with that. And that takes some time, different for every child. Another thing is language delays, and I put perceived here because it is quite interesting from the research that's coming. Is we often see, okay, if a child is speaking 2, 3, 4 languages, that they have a language delay because they might not be able to express themselves as thoroughly in one language as they can in another. But really what's happening there is within each additional language that they have, their vocabulary may be narrower within that language. But if you take the accumulation of all of the languages that they speak and the vocabulary across, is where you start to see that evening out between a monolingual individual and a multilingual individual. So you start to see that there is the same level of language across a different number of languages. So something that's quite important to kind of look into if you have those resources is connecting with other educators or teachers from your setting, especially if you have a language specialist, to see, are you noticing the same patterns across all languages that they're speaking, or is it predominantly in one? So let's say it's in their mother tongue, they're able to express ideas and communicate, but in English, they have limited vocabulary to express themselves. So then you see that this is not a language delay because the language is developed in mother tongue, but this is just a smaller vocabulary set that they have to work with. Or if you're noticing challenges of expressing themselves across all languages, then you have more of a direct path of looking into some possible language delays. So that collaboration is really important between all of the specialists and professionals that you have in your setting. Then we come to code switching, which I do quite enjoy. Code switching is just the natural process of switching between languages in order to express ideas. So you start a sentence in one language, and then you throw a word in there that's from another language, and then you continue on. And this is really great because the thing that I think we want to look at here is that the learner is really demonstrating their resourcefulness. They've got so many skills that they're using at that time, and they're constructing all of these statements that they want to express, or these ideas. And they know, okay, I've gotten to this word and I don't know that one, so I'm going to fill the gap with a known, and then I'm going to go back to the unknown and I'll find that later. So it really is such a significant cognitive exercise that they're doing there to be able to switch so fluently between both. Also, this is really demonstrated to them a lot, because I think as adults, there is a lot of code switching as well. I am a monolingual individual. I'm currently learning another language, but I do the same thing. I try much as I can in German, but then it goes quickly back into English, because that's where the end of my vocabulary is. So children are hearing and seeing this from the adults around them, so it's a natural process for them to go into that same resourcefulness. So when we look at the classroom environment and we see we have this diverse group of children that are all at different levels of their language, some coming with one language, some coming with 2 up to 5 languages, how do we encourage that engagement across the whole group? And we really want to look at valuing contributions. Even if a child is expressing themselves or trying to communicate in mother tongue, I think we have to value that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I didn't understand all of those words, so I'd really try to figure that out together. But thank you for that piece of information that you've shared with me. We really want children to feel like they're valued, no matter what language they're communicating to us in, even if that is nonverbal. Something that's also quite great is starting to extend their learning by asking them to make those connections. So whatever unit or topic you might be talking about in class, just going around the room and asking, does anyone know this in a different language? Can you teach us how to say this, but in your language? Now children are being seen, they're being valued for their contributions of information that they know that others might. They're also expanding the language of those around them, and it's helping to build the connections in their brain between those 2 languages for them. And they're also able to share parts of their own culture, which is so important when building identity and belonging within a group. And I think we also really need to look at peer-to-peer support for translation. This is something we do a lot in my current setting. And with so many languages being spoken within the school, we're pretty good at being able to find one person that can speak that language and connect to someone else, even if they're in different classes. If there is one child that is speaking a language and no one else in their group is speaking that language, we will find somebody and connect them with a peer within the school so that they have someone that they can communicate with. I think something that's really important, especially for young children being in an earlier setting, children need to know that they feel safe and secure. And one of the contributions to that is knowing that they can be understood. So as long as they know that there's someone in the building that can understand what they're saying, that gives them that bit of relief that they've got someone that they can go to should they really need support. Otherwise, we do what we do. And those skills of helping them to understand what they're saying to us. And then when we look at engagement for all, So those children that are still learning the language of instruction, visual cards connected to vocabulary are very powerful, especially giving them some core vocabulary if it's connected to the unit, even having images together with a word, sending those home so that they can build those connections between mother tongue and the language of instruction, and being able to make those connections. It involves the family as well. Nonverbal communication, so important. Valuing all engagement from all children, and that's from us as well. We might not have the words that we want to share, but we want to make that connection with all of the learners in our group. So we use our nonverbal communication and the children use theirs, and using that together as well. And what I didn't have on here was also going back to visuals, but having visual timetables within the classroom so that children are able to understand the structure of the day. They know what's to come, when the day is going to end, because that's usually a big stressor for children, of not knowing when the end of the day is. So I just know I need to get through going to the playground, and then after that I go home. So giving the children that sense of security as well, and being able to follow the expectations and routines of the classroom. So how can we include multilingual learners in documentation? This is a big one, because I think there is this perception that we must know what a child is saying in order to document. And if they're speaking in another language, how can we document that and therefore make our assessments? So when we remove that barrier of language, sharing stories of learning gives us so much more. So it's focusing on that approach of play. You remove the possibility of a language barrier. So the child is able to see their contribution to the class as a whole person, especially when we're looking at assessments. Depending on the setting that you're in, often there is a summative assessment at the end, which often requires a lot of verbal input. But when we're looking at summative assessments, we're looking at the understanding that the child has, and we're not assessing them on language at that time. We're assessing them on the understanding. So we need to provide multiple opportunities for learners to engage and share their level of learning, whether that's through action, through construction, through drawings, through demonstration. So it doesn't have to be only a language production to show their understanding. So looking at the power of learning stories, this is a great opportunity for the educator and the child to be involved together in the child's development and play, and get the child involved as well in their own documentation. So learning stories were launched by Margaret Carr and Wendy Lee from New Zealand, and it was as a form of assessments. And learning stories are written by educators to the child. So it is a story from the educator to the child, describing the play that they were a part of. So the story can focus on learning that occurred during the play, interactions, and observable thinking routines. And this is really great because it's giving the child a sense of a picture of what they were doing, and they're seeing it from an outside perspective. So when we're looking for creating learning stories, there are so many different things that you can focus on and look on. And I've just put a couple of examples here, but there are so many different things that you could do. What you could be looking for to create a learning story is child-initiated play. So the play comes from the child, the idea is the interest in the discovery. So you're just observing how that play started and how it's building and what processes are there. Engagement, talking about the level of engagement. Is the play sustained or inquiry for some time? So really looking at that duration of the engagement as well. Intentionality. A lot of times I love just observing to see how children, they have a goal, but what are those processes and steps that they're taking to reach that? And sometimes there is a lot of planning that goes into that, which is amazing to see. And they're talking about what materials they need to start with and where are they going to find those, and then what are they going to do with them next. So that's really that intentionality of play. Of course, the relationships that are happening within that. And learning stories do not have to only be about, cooperative play. It could very much be about solitary or parallel play at all, depending on the age of the child. So the relationships, the child will have those relationships with others or with the materials in that way, because you can really look at how they're respecting materials and how they're really understanding them and maybe wanting to discover their properties. So you can see all of that. And then, of course, learning dispositions. So the children's way of learning or approach to figuring things out is revealed. And this is always a great one to just see how they problem solve during their play. Building towers and the tower falls down. What are they looking at to rebuild there? Are they starting to look at balance and weight? They're starting to predict and measure there. So they're really putting all of this these ways of learning into their play that they don't know about. So we are providing them with the metacognition so that they're able to start thinking about how they are learning. Now we look at then sharing those stories, because we created that story. And what do we do with them now? We share them back with the children. And this is really great, especially for multilingual learners who might be in the silent phase or still developing that language of instruction. So reading that story back to the child is providing the insight into what was being discussed or done. So the child is hearing their play from a different perspective, and this gives them the opportunity to feed back. So for that child, they could be gaining new insights and explaining something of, oh yeah, I was talking about this when I was building that, or this part of it. And they go into more depth of what their thinking process was in addition to what was being observed. On the other side, the child is also learning new words to their lived experience. So they're starting to make connections now between their actions and the language that they're developing. So that's something that's also very powerful for children, especially those children that are in that silent phase or acquiring the language. They are starting to see themselves as that whole child and what they are bringing to that environment, where they might not be bringing language, but they're bringing all of these other things. And again, going back to being valued and having that sense of belonging within the classroom community. Not only would we share the stories with children, and then metacognition, which I touched on, of this is helping the child understand how they are thinking. So they're starting to think about their own thinking, which is a great process that we can still do in early childhood. We do not have to wait until children are older to start talking about metacognition. Then we share the stories with families. And again, making connections with families and the mother tongue, so powerful, the home to school connection. The more involved parents are in the child's time at school, the more benefits the child has and a better relationship they have with school. So not only are you making those connections with the families, where the families can engage with the story. If you're using a platform like Seesaw, the families can provide their own feedback as well. Talk about the connections that they made at home. Maybe they talked about these, after dinner together or before bedtime. They talked about those stories and what the child's play was, and providing that opportunity for the child to give more information. So there's also that glimpse inside the classroom. And then, of course, that connection and deepening mother tongue. So having that experience at school in one language, and then being able to have the same conversation at home in their mother tongue, potentially learning new vocabulary words, but being able to make a connection again and be valued across all aspects of each child as an individual. And then, homeschool connection and that sense of belonging and connection there. So knowing that school is not only school and home is not only home, we can cross between those and we can make those connections. Okay. We are now going to maybe just talk through some different ideas. Amy, I don't know how you'd like to do the next session, but we do have 3 little topics that we could talk about, and looking at some examples of learning stories as well.
Yeah, since there's only 3 of us tonight,
Yeah.
we had thought of doing some breakout rooms, but you can't really do a breakout room. So why don't we pick 1 or 2 of these that we can have a little bit of a conversation about? I will leave it up to our participant if topic 1, 2, or 3 is most interesting.
I actually want to do topic 3 because I also have a question on what Laura was speaking about. So,
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so supporting children in that silent phase or the still developing the language of instruction.
Mhm.
What was your question around that one?
Okay, so I love learning stories, and I've always made my learning stories for parents, but you actually got me thinking because there's something I don't do. I do not, and I've never actually thought of doing it. I have never shared my learning story with the children. So here's my thinking, and here's a question for you. My learning story is written in English. If I take my current class right now, who's mainly Vietnamese speaking, do I read the learning story that I've written to them, the way I've written it for their parents, share it, and then get someone to translate it? Or I see the value in what you say, but now my concern is how do I share the value of their learning story with them if they don't understand the words that I'm using within the learning story?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I think you have to know, it kind of goes back to that having to know your audience, and
Yeah.
needing to know where their level is. I think there is value in still sharing it in English, maybe changing some of that vocabulary because you wouldn't potentially use the same vocabulary if your audience is the parents, if it's with the child. And then if possible, having either, this is an opportunity to bring in peer-to-peer translation, if you do have another child within the group that could translate some of it, so that
Okay.
it then is keeping them involved with that community of peers.
Yeah.
Or bringing in, if you have another teacher within the room that can speak that language to them. But I would still think to share the whole learning story in English and then having some highlights that you want to put in there in their mother tongue, so in Vietnamese, that you would like them, or even just some questions that you would like to engage them with to get a bit more information on their side.
I do. I actually think it's a wonderful idea, sharing it with them because it's their learning story. It's going on Seesaw anyway. I just don't know why I've never thought of it. And so hearing you actually say, share it with your student. Yes, as teachers, we can break it down even further into their language. But the idea of sharing it, I absolutely love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that really helps that connection and you build a relationship with your children as well, because you're able to directly communicate the story and the things that you've observed and appreciated and valued that they did at that time. So instead of hearing it third party from mom or dad, they're hearing it directly from you. And that is a great way because it could be really hard to develop relationships when you don't have common language. So this is a way of kind of one little bridge for that gap, and an opportunity to focus solely on individual children and share that with them. And just I'd be so interested in what they wanted to share back to you about that, of being seen within that space.
Yes. And it makes me think. Oh, sorry. Yes, Amy?
I was just going to say, I find it's an opportunity, and I know we as educators don't like to model or speak in front of our children with grammatically incorrect sentences. But when you're speaking to a child where there's no common language between the two of you, and there's nobody else in the room that has a common language with them, it's single words. It is just however you can communicate it. So I had a little Polish boy. Nobody spoke Polish. So it was pointing at the block. Oh, blocks. And then going, so big. How? Like, and it was not grammatically correct, but it was a way to engage with him. And he had the biggest smile on his face because he was able to make that connection despite not having a common language we could speak together.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I've had that as well. You know, you try to stay as grammatically correct as possible, but you have to know, I mean, you wouldn't do that for the entire day that you're together, but to get a certain message across, you want to make the connection however you can. And I think there is value in both. Of course, we're role models and we're demonstrating the language, but at the same time, we just want to connect. And we want to have that opportunity to share ideas with our learners. And I think everyone would understand that.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
I did stop sharing because it was a bit awkward. And I like to see everyone when I'm when I'm talking. But that's a really great point. Going back to kind of engaging, how to engage those children. What other ways, Michelle, do you engage with those children if their language level is lower and you can't have as much conversation as you would hope?
I do a lot of singing and dancing, and then I do lots of actions with it. So for a hole, I did a song, there's a hole in the middle of the sea, and I would make a big circle and I do the waves. And so now, because singing gets them entertained and get them moving. So for me, I believe in doing lots of that because that is how I share little vocabulary. And by doing the same songs over a long period of time, they tend to get the vocabulary easy. So that is one thing that I do. Another thing, I have a student who's a really good, my peer, who can translate so well. And his understanding and comprehension is good. So I do a lot of that. But anything else that I saw you did the flashcards, and that's another idea that I tend to have lost or forgotten about this year that I think I will go back to doing again.
It's one of those things, and I mean, we use so many strategies in our time that sometimes it's like, okay, I've done that one a long time and I switch it up, but you just forget, it's just, there's so many ideas. We've been using them with some of the children in our setting. We've had 2 children join us from Korea who do not have English, do not have German. So for them, they really struggled. And we found that creating the visual timetable was very helpful for them, but we also found a lot of common language. What we noticed doing some observations, just listening, what were the children in that class talking about the most? And then creating a little bank of vocabulary words for them so they were able to still engage with their peers. And it's almost like knowing what the new slang is, but just knowing what their conversations are around. Of course, we took pictures of spaces, and you always want to go with the prime needs, the human needs. So we always have food, water, toilet, I need a rest, whatever those things are. Those are always on there so that they know that their needs will be met. But then they have pictures of their cubbies, pictures of the music room, the sports room, the cafeteria. And so they're able to know before transition. They look at that card, which we put all together, and they wear it as a necklace so that they always have those cards with them. And then they're able to flip through and can point to it no matter wherever they're on the playground, if they're in the cafeteria, whatever it might be, they always have those cards with them, and they go home as well. So they go home to be talked about in their mother tongue, and then they can make those connections between home and school. And that we found was really helpful. They used it for about 3 weeks and then they said they didn't want them anymore because they felt
Okay.
secure in that vocabulary. So whether that then gets added to or stopped, you know, you can always add more vocabulary once they start developing the words that you have there. But I think the key is allowing them in some way to keep it with them. So it's almost like a little security blanket that they have it that they can use.
And
Wow,
also before
that's-
before those kids start, talking to the parents and getting those key words phonetically written out in English. So if you want to know what the word toilet is, ask them to phonetically write it out. So that way, if you think a child has to go use the toilet, you're able to say that word in whatever their home language is. Because some of them, especially at 3, aren't going to advocate when they need the toilet.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that is something we do in our orientation meetings. So not even multilingual learners, like all of our children were like, do you have special words for anything? Because you might have a different word for bathroom at home than we would socially use at school. So if a child is using that word, we want to make sure that we can understand them and give them the respect of knowing their needs as well. So we always do a what are keywords that you have at home that are not the typical words that we would use. And that's something that's very valuable. You know, names of comfort toys, their stuffies, whatever they are, just having that information for us.
being mindful of time, we've got what, about 15-20 minutes left today.
Okay.
So I don't know, I can't remember what's next on our
So we also were going to, we had the idea of looking at, so engaging multilingual learners in this setting, which I think we've also talked about. And the last was about looking at some learning stories and seeing what would be included. But Michelle, would you, because you said you engage with learning stories a lot and you share them with families, what are some key aspects that you include in your learning stories?
So I like to, if they are playing with a friend, obviously are they communicating? Are they sharing? If they're having an argument, did they solve it? Were they able to think of a solution to whatever problem they had? And so being IBPYP, these are things that I try to include for the parents and let parents know. If it's solitary play, I want to see, was the child thinking? Was he able to build? Did he use his surroundings? If the structure fell down, did he give up and walk away, or did he persist and continue? Did he ask for help from different people? Did he make connections to what were in the classroom?
And that's great. Thinking about I'm just thinking about the solitary play, but even conflict would be great, because sharing that story back to the child almost makes it kind of a social story, a social concept story, that they can start seeing from a different perspective of, oh, okay, yeah, no, there was a conflict there. Maybe I could have done something differently with the way I solved that. Or even starting to talk about self-regulation of, you know, how Howard fell down and got frustrated and walked away, of what could you do next time? You know, let's say that's going to keep happening. What might you do next time if it happened again? So it's starting to engage the children in their own thinking, because maybe for them, they think that's just the end. Maybe they never considered, oh, let me try building it again. So those skills of persistence and resilience are taught. And that's one of the ways of sharing the story back to them, that we could start to begin planting those seeds for them to consider. Those
Thank you. I love this idea.
I find it really helpful, especially when there are those solitary play kids, and it happens in every single classroom. You find you've got somebody solitary playing, and then another kid comes in and disrupts that solitary play.
Mm.
how does that child react to their solitary play
Yeah.
being disrupted? Are they able to cope? Some of them are not. And then if they're not, helping them work through, again, what you said, what do you do? What could we do next time? Or if they were able to cope, praising them. Wow, I really like the way you, and tell them what they did that was so great. Because some kids don't want to play with others.
Yeah, but what I notice quite a bit when their solitary play is, and then when they're getting to that parallel play and starting to slightly, they're on that verge of wanting to go to kind of some collaborative play. But what you notice is the child's playing and they're doing something, but they start to just kind of look around at others to see. So they're showing interest in others. And so when you bring that back to them of, while you were playing with the Legos, you looked at the other person playing with the Legos. And then you're almost able to kind of talk through and have that little opportunity to, what if you put all of your Legos together? You know, and then so it's kind of helping them onto that next step, because there is an interest shown by watching, but they might not know the steps or wanting someone to come. One thing that we work on a lot in some of the settings that I've worked in is how to invite someone to play with you, because that's another skill.
Yes.
Instead of just, I think it can be misconstrued of going over and taking someone's toy, but really they're trying to force an interaction, but they just don't know how to do it. Instead of saying, could we build together, or would you like to come play with me? Because that is not a natural skill that I think we pick up. It just comes across as they've taken my toy, but really they're trying to engage and they just don't quite know how. So that's another opportunity of using those stories to extend. All right. Amy, would you like to extend to another point?
Sure.
We've talked about quite a lot.
I think we've done a lot.
Yeah. I know. I still, in all honesty, I must say thank you, because I haven't thought of the value of sharing the learning story. And you've opened my eyes to a new way of bringing them in, incorporating them in, getting them to think about or seeing what I saw from their play, their learning story that I created. So Laura, I'm just sitting here flabbergasted by what I haven't seen and what I'm going to try to do when I go back.
Oh, I'm excited for your journey on this. Honestly, it's going to be great.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
I
that
think
were
we
going
have
to.
too. So I guess do you have any other questions for our expert, Michelle?
No, I don't. But would you like to share? Okay, I would love this. Would Laura like to share one of the learning stories that she thinks one of her faculty members have written, if you have it or have an idea of it?
I don't have it on hand, but I could share something with Amy.
Okay, great.
So definitely. I will find one of them and share them with you, but that's something that I don't have on hand just right now.
Okay, it's just nice to go through a couple of learning stories and see what people are writing about, how I can improve my learning stories. Then tell me something. Here in Vietnam, I find it really hard to engage parents in the learning story. They read it and that's it. That's the end. In China, I had a different experience. Parents engaged more. But do you have the same? I'm sure you must have the same problem. How do you guys overcome that obstacle with parents?
So, I mean, that is a challenge in all settings, I think. And it always fluctuates, even from age. I find that parents of the youngest children are more engaged. So we start at 1 year old. And of course, that's their baby. They're giving their baby to someone and they're very involved. And it's almost kind of a double-edged sword, because the more trust and relationship you build with the school, then the parents feel, okay, you guys are good, like you got this. And then their engagement kind of comes off a little bit. But we try to keep our parents engaged through, we do have a parent association. We call our parent representatives. So every class has one member, and I meet with them every month. So we come together and I talk about Seesaw a lot. And I talk about the effort that the educators put into all the observations and the time they take. And then I just tell them straight up, like, they have spent a considerable amount of time and effort getting to know your children and documenting their learning. It would be really great if you could show your respect and thanks by viewing these. But we also encourage just either providing the parents with prompts, something that we just did last month. Every month, our leadership team, we host a coffee morning with some of the parents, and we give them the topics. And last month was how to have a conversation with your children. That might not come naturally for them. And so it's, you know, how to engage and how to ask questions about their learning, because often it's just the what did you do today, in which the child is so overloaded with everything that they've done, it's easier to say nothing. I didn't do anything today, than it is to recount every detail of their day. So we talk about being more specific. Pick one specific time of day of what did you talk about during morning circle today to narrow the child's focus of recall. But also providing prompts on Seesaw, you know, have this, you know, review this story with your child at home and give us some feedback about what they said. So again, I think it's bringing the child back into it, whereas sometimes Seesaw is seen as just teacher to parent, rather than also the child. So it's about that engagement that they put in there. And even writing your posts, so you have your stories, but writing them, you know, changing that language of, dear Michelle, here is your learning story for the month or week or whatever it is, and then putting it in there. And maybe it's just a slight change of re-engaging the parents of, oh, this is for the child, let me share it with them. So I think it's a challenge. It's just finding those right moments, but also sharing the expectations of, these are for you to engage with us and your child. Have those conversations during, you know, mealtime. I saw that you did this today. Tell me more about that, or tell me about this picture. It just helps extend child's learning as well.
Thank you.
I think honestly, parent engagement is a trial and error. It's going to be different for every parent. But once they start seeing that, the value of it, I think it really does shift.
I think every class is different too. So one year you have a really engaged class of parents, and then the next year it's a little harder. Not as many. Yeah.
I've had a year that I've had to turn away parent volunteers because I had too many and not enough stuff for them to do, and a year of begging for someone, anyone.
Yep.
Yep. Oh, well, I want to say a big thank you to both of you, Laura for presenting, Michelle for coming, and I know this is a valuable topic, and hopefully the rest of the people who signed up yet could not attend will be able to view this on the website. I will have it posted by tomorrow. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Amy and Michelle, for sharing all of your amazing things as well.
All right.
Okay, thank you.